I just left the gym right now, and I had a moment of reflection where I just, I get constant reminders that, we are what we choose to be. And that, in my opinion, one of the coolest things about being is that we get to choose who we are. We get to craft who we are. And it's not always just, a big session of, like you're designing your avatar character on a PS5 where you're like, this and this and this, and then bam, that's who I am. It's a lot of small decisions and a lot of small elements. And that came to me in the gym because as I'm there, the gym is just somewhere that's so filled with emotions and stories. You can see as you look around all the archetypes. You got the sad boys, and you got the junkies, and you got the hot girls, and you got the people who are just striving to be better, and all of them kind of come with their own emotions. You in the gym you see heartbreak, and you see depression, and you see commitment, and you see discipline, you see drive, passion, and fire, and fury, and hope. And if you ask any person, why are you here? There's a story. There's a story always attached. It's story, XYZ, event, actions, an event, and then decision, action, and that's why I come here, and that's why this is a part of who I am. And maybe they've reached a point where it is part of who they are, self-identity wise, and maybe there's someone who's early in the decision making where they're continuously making that decision. But regardless, there's a story attached to the why of this action, why I made this decision. Because nobody just happens to be going to the gym, it's a decision. And I love that, because for any given person, take any of those emotional examples or stereotype, archetype, whatever, and it's story, and all of this is like, here's the gym point, it's like story, and then there's the gym part where it's still story but it ends in the gym. But at any point before they started going to the gym and decided to turn this story into this, it's just this part of the story. It's just the negative part, or the heartbreak, the dissatisfaction, the stagnation, whatever it is. It's just this part of the story, and it eventually became this part where there's somebody who's driving to do something, and it's a part of who they are, this act of discipline. But there's also the part before that, and it's the same story, it's the same events, but this version here looks at it a little differently than this person here does. We all look at it a little differently now than we did before. And somewhere in between there was a decision to see it differently. Or to take control and write the script of where it goes. And that's pretty cool. And so I say that in full circle of, I think one of the coolest parts about being people is that we get to decide who we are. And maybe we decide to let it be, whatever the natural product of how that story unfolds is. And maybe we decide how we're going to see that story and who we're going to become. And maybe any of the events maybe none of the events are set in stone, and you get to decide all of it. Like, have you ever experienced an emotion attached to an event in a way that didn't last forever? Okay, so let's break that down. You spilled coffee on your shirt, and then you experienced an emotion and took actions, and in that moment you were pissed. That's who you were, is pissed off. And 4 days later, it doesn't matter at all. That action and event has nothing to do with the person that you are. Has nothing to do with your identity. Nothing to do with the actions you take. Nothing to do with any of it. Who you are, right? And that's a micro example. This is an event. This is part of a story, and it pissed you off. And for whatever reason, during and after the event, you were somebody who was pissed off. That is your identity. That's who you were. Every action you take, you couldn't help but avoid. You couldn't avoid being somebody who's pissed off and taking pissed off actions, right? And that's a product of that story, is what we say. I was pissed off because that coffee spilled on me, because I spilled my coffee on me. That is it. It's a fact. It's true. That's how we saw it. And a week later, it's just not even part of the story anymore, and it's not a part of who you are. So if that can happen within a week cycle, why the fuck couldn't it happen within a decade cycle? Why the fuck couldn't it happen within, 5 years cycle, 1 year cycle? Why the fuck would any event that happened X amount of time ago still have control over who and how you see yourself to be? If an event has ever disappeared from who you are and how you see yourself, if that has ever happened, if there's ever been an event that made you a certain way and then disappeared and didn't matter anymore, then why the fuck should any event linger around and hold on to a part of who you are and have control over that? It's all malleable. In that case, I think that's hugely exciting. Because it doesn't have to be just one event. It could be a decade of experiences. It could be 5 years, 10 years. It could be a whole upbringing of X type of experiences, which at some point may not matter, so long as you decide to move on. Because in the case of the person who spilled that coffee, who got over it and erased it from what mattered, that was a decision. They focused on other things. They decided not to continue seeing themselves as the person who spilled coffee on themselves for the next 5 years or the next month. Could you imagine that? Spilling coffee on yourself once and then being pissed off about it for like the next month? That'd be crazy, right? So couldn't you also reason that like an event or series of events or era or stage or phase or whatever the fuck, can you also reason that it might be crazy to let that hold you back in anything or have any control over who you decide to be, unless it's the way that you decide to be? Anyways, that's just what I'm thinking. Deuce.